So now to finish handwork. I usually take about an arm's length of thread. This will be a single thread. Make a dressmaker's knot. And at the very top of the zipper, where the fabrics are folded in, I'm going to close that area. And as you see, I took the slider and slid it down a little bit so the zipper teeth are not in the way. Once you've done all the folding at the top, the area that you need to sew will be very obvious. And I'm just doing tiny little stitches in and out, nothing special. By running the thread through the beeswax, it will strengthen it. However, on good silks, I often don't use it because sometimes it will leave a little residue. This thread probably could be a little bit shorter. The longer the thread, the more likely it is to knot up. So run it through the wax to make it nice and stiff. That helps prevent knotting. And what I'm doing is kind of a diagonal stitch. I'm taking a little bit from the facing or the binding, and then going into the interfacing, keeping my hand on the top and underneath to make sure I don't go through all layers. Now, watch what I do here. I'm going to take the needle and put it in the bottom of the bias and just catch the interlining. I've actually folded it down, the facing down as you see, and so the interlining is standing up and a fraction away from the linen. So it's easy just to do a running stitch this way all the way around the neckline, and it won't show from the outside or the inside. It'll be a hidden stitch because it's just a fraction under the bias. Keeping my fingers underneath, I would be able to feel how many layers the needle is going through, and I don't want it to go all the way through. Just catching the interlining. You want the stitches to be snug, but not to gather in the garment. So every once in a while, I'll take the fabric that I'm stitching and pull it either direction, both directions at the same time, to sort of stretch those stitches out in case some of them are too tight. The stitches are about 1/2 of an inch apart. You can make them as close or as loose as you'd like, as far apart as you'd like. I usually let the type of garment and the fabric I'm using dictate how long my stitches are, because sometimes tight stitches tend to make the garment pucker. On that stitch, apparently I caught the linen, so I'm pulling the linen away from the interlining. The reason I didn't put too many pins around the neckline before starting this process is because it's so easy to stick myself with the pins. So sometimes I just kind of pin a certain area, and then when I get to the next area, pin that area. In this area, I'm weaving the needle in and out so as to stitch but also hide what is folded under. And then back up to the top at the opposite side of where I started. The little gap where the folding is at the top of the zipper and facing. And then weave the needle back in. If you weave it several times, it works as well as knotting it. Now you can see how I caught the interlining but not the outer layer of linen. And to do the same thing for the hem facing. Pulling the linen away from the interlining, so just the interlining is folded up. This just makes it much easier to be very accurate with the sewing and not accidentally stitch through the linen. When I get to seam allowances, often that's where I'll make smaller stitches or extra stitches to just reinforce everything. So just continue the handwork all the way around the hem. In that area, you can see how I pull the fabric to make sure the stitches don't gather up the body of the garment. I do this every once in a while if I either accidentally gather or just feel that the stitches are a little bit tight. You can see how I'm reinforcing at the seam allowance. And now transitioning up the zipper. And I'm doing the same thing. I pulled the linen away from the interlining, so I'm catching the bias to the interlining. And as you see, by folding the fabric where the bias is, folding it down, you won't see the stitches from the outside. They'll be hidden underneath. In a garment that might be a looser fit, I might, at times, wrap all of the seams. But sometimes wrapping seams can lead to a little bit extra bulk. So on the princess seams, the zigzag is a better finish in this particular instance. And repeating the same process on the other side of the zipper. Now this, hopefully you can see it. Sometimes I unfortunately forget this is being filmed and pull my hands too close to my body. But what I'm doing is securing the bottom of the zipper into the seam allowance so it doesn't flop around. It'll just look nicer and probably feel better when being worn. And now to finish the zipper stitching so I can open the back and the model can get in and out of the garment. What I'm doing right now is determining where the bottom of the zipper actually is, where the stitching in the back of the garment stops being basting stitches and is tight stitches. So I will stitch from the top down to that area. I'm going to slip my needle up through the facing and out so that the knot doesn't show. And I'm going to do what is called a prick stitch, and it's actually, in this case, a back stitch. So I'm going behind the stitch, just a fraction, maybe just a fiber or two, just as little a stitch as you can make, and then coming back up through the fabric, go behind that stitch and come in front of it approximately 1/4 of an inch. And I'm doing these stitches about 1/4 of an inch from the center seam. You want to be sure that you're not interfering with the teeth. Now, you could use a double thread, but I find that usually the double thread knots up more easily. And this garment is not going to have a huge amount of pressure. It's not something that will be so tight that when it's worn, it will put a lot of pressure on the back seam. I'm going through all layers. If it's hard at first for you to create a rather straight line with your stitching, what you can do is take a basting thread, a hand basting thread, and run it next to where you want the stitches to be. And then you could go back and stitch right next to that thread and then pull the thread out. Or you could mark it with chalk if the chalk won't leave any marks. Now that straight pin indicates where the opening of the zipper is at the bottom of the zipper. And so at that area, I'm just going to turn a 90-degree angle. You can't really sew through the teeth with this, but I can make a stitch or two across and then continue up the other side. Since I'm at the end of this thread, I just pull it through so I can loop it around a few times, and then I'll start again and finish the other side of the zipper. and weaving it through the needle through the fabric as a finishing touch. And now to open this, what I'm doing is taking the little clippers and just popping the seam. This is a basted seam, so the stitches are far enough apart that they're loose. So just pop one, and then if you can, slide the zipper pull down. It takes a little finagling to get it, but eventually you can just kind of push it down, and that exposes the seam so that you can stretch the two sides of the back apart, see the stitches, and break them with the little clippers or your seam ripper. And I'm just basically popping or clipping a stitch and then gently pulling apart that area. As you see, I would not ever take your seam ripper or your clippers and run it down the seam. It's way too easy to cut your fabric, which I have done. Then you can go back and just pull out all the little extraneous threads. And what a nice way to finish a zipper. Again, I'm using contrasting threads so you can see what I'm doing, but if the thread matched, this would even be more lovely. And just now pulling out all the basting threads. As you can see, the stitches barely show because they're so tiny. There you have it. And now to sew the armholes. It's the same process as all the other bias binding. Sewing into the bias and into the interlining, trying to avoid sewing all the way through the outer shell of linen. trimming excess threads. Now what I want to do is make lingerie straps. This garment has a deep neckline and it could shift around on the body. By having lingerie straps, you anchor the garment to the bra straps, which keeps the garment in place. So, what I'm going to do is take a thread. I'm actually taking a double thread, running it through the wax. Start about half an inch in from the outside of the shoulder. Take a stitch. I'm going to trim off that excess around the knot. You can hide your knot if you want, of course. And then make a loop. See how, well, I'm going to stitch it a couple times to make it super strong. Now make a loop like this. Reach through the loop and take the thread, pull the thread. This takes some practice. And when you pull the thread, it becomes a knot. You push that knot by pulling it. You push the knot one on top of another. If I were to let go, if I let my left hand out and just pulled this, it would all come apart. So this is basically a chain stitch. You keep reaching through, grabbing the thread, and the thread that you've grabbed from the right hand, it slides down and the knots stack on top of each other. And I'll make this about 1.5 inches long. If you look very carefully, you can see all those little knots just stacking. Sometimes I actually use buttonhole twist or take a double thread, put it through the needle so you have 4 threads through the needle. You can also use ribbon. Ribbon's very easy. But I wanted to show you how to do it with thread. So I make it as long as I want. I'd say about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches. Some bra straps are pretty wide. And when you get it to the length that you want, this is about 1.25 inches, about 1 3/8 inches. Then when you get it to the length you want, take the needle. Take the needle straight through and pull it, and that knots it. So now it will not come undone. And you want to take one side of the snap and sew to the very end. So basically you just go through one of the holes and wrap it around quite a few times. I'm also going to stab right through those knots to just make it nice and secure. Be sure to use a good strong thread. Again, buttonhole twist is great to use. Knot it off. And clip your thread. If you notice, it will snap close to the neck, not the armhole. That makes it much easier to put your bra strap through this. Place the other snap. It doesn't matter which side of the snap you use for which piece. And I'm burying my knot underneath the facing and stitching through the facing, maybe the seam allowance, but certainly not to the outside of the garment. Whoops. And go through 2 or 3 times, whatever seems very secure. These do get a fair amount of abrasion, so you want to make sure they're good and snug and sewn very securely. And just sew around through each hole. Looks like I'm doing them 3 times a piece. That should be sufficient. So to actually use these, the model or the wearer puts the garment on with the little straps unsnapped, slips the straps under their bra straps, and then snaps them. Then they can adjust it in the mirror, just so it's symmetrical on either side, and it won't move while they're wearing it. It'll stay put across their shoulders. There you go. And I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. Making the loop, reaching through the loop, grabbing the thread from the right hand, and if you just pull the thread from the right hand, the knot goes right down to the bottom, and then they start stacking. Again, it takes a little practice, but it's a lot of fun. Pulling the needle through and making the knot at the top. Comparing to make sure that the snap on both sides are placed in the same area. Burying the knot under the facing. And our top is ready for a final press and to see it on our model. Being a snug top and linen, it's never going to be as wrinkle-free as other fibers like a silk or a wool. But this is a wonderful fabric for teaching purposes, and it will make for a beautiful top for our model. Be sure to check your iron to make sure that it doesn't leave a shine. This iron has a wonderful finish on the plate, so it doesn't leave a shine unless I press really hard. If yours leaves a shine, then use a press cloth. And you could even use the same linen or a piece of the interlining and just wash the sizing out of it, let it dry, and use that on top of the fabric before you place the iron onto the press cloth, so the iron doesn't go directly on the fabric. This iron also gives beautiful speed. I'm only putting a little pressure on it. You see how the hemline starts to disappear. There was a serious crease there, but it pretty much disappears with the steam. Sometimes basting threads and such that are not removed might create a little pulling, so there's no reason to necessarily take out basting threads, but if they cause a problem, then you want to either break the thread or pull it out completely. I see basting threads, so let's get rid of those. If you're afraid of this blade, then use a straight pin, slide it under the stitch, pull up, and then clip. Many times with seams, princess seams, I press them away from center front, but because of the many layers of fabric, I decided to press these open. When you go to purchase linen, often you can find linen that is called softened linen, and it has a softer feel and look, and it doesn't have the wrinkling that this type of linen has. And there you have it. We'll check it on our model, and we have a finished top.